Hey there, and welcome to the Deep Dive. It's really fascinating, isn't it, how the stories we consume, like the songs we hum, the shows we binge watch, they subtly shape how we see the world. Today we're exploring a really critical intersection, how contemporary media, drama, novels, music, comedy is representing, and maybe even normalizing a concept that in many cultures, especially within Islam, is considered a really grave transgression. Our insights for this deep dive, they come from a pretty comprehensive research report. It uses a qualitative approach, lots of library research, detailed content analysis, and it pulls directly from sources like the Quran, Hadith, the views of classical and contemporary Islamic scholars, and gives relevant examples, mainly from contemporary Indonesian media, actually.
Yeah, and our mission today really is to meticulously analyze these media representations. We want to understand their significant impact on how society perceives things. We're going to explore how certain depictions might sort of gradually desensitize the public, maybe reducing the seriousness of what Islam considers a major sin. It's really about understanding why this whole phenomenon is so problematic from an Islamic perspective and, what it means for our collective moral understanding.
Okay, let's unpack this then. To really get a handle on the normalization part, we first need a clear understanding of what zina actually means within the Islamic framework. What exactly is this act? How's it classified?
Right. So in Islam, zina is, unequivocally seen as one of the most serious major sins. It's called a kabira, something that incurs divine wrath. And it's broadly categorized into two main types, zina hakiki and zina majazi. Zina hakiki refers to the actual physical sexual intercourse between a man and a woman who aren't legally married. That's the most severe form. And it carries strict penalties under Islamic law, which can differ based on whether someone's married or not, as you see outlined in Hadith in the Quran, like in Surah An-Nur, verse 2.
Okay, zina hakiki is the physical act itself. What about the other type you mentioned, zina majazi?
Ah, yes, Zina majazi. Now, this is where it gets really interesting for our discussion today. These are actions that don't involve direct physical intercourse, but they're considered acts that approach zina. They can lead to sexual arousal, temptation, basically opening the door to the more severe zina hakiki. And while they don't carry the same kind of physical punishments, they're still considered major sins because of their potential to lead someone down that path.
So zina isn't just the physical act itself. It's also this broader range of actions, maybe even intentions, that lead towards it. That's a much broader definition than many might assume. It really emphasizes that command you mentioned, do not approach.
Yeah.
Could you maybe give us a few examples of what zina majazi actually includes?
Absolutely. The sources, they detail several forms. For example, there's zina mata, which is the zina of the eyes. It refers to looking at non-mahram individuals with lust. A non-mahram person is essentially anyone you're not forbidden to marry by Islamic law, so not like your parent or sibling.
Okay.
And this is explicitly addressed in the Quran, Surah An-Nur, verse 30, urging believers to lower their gaze.
Right.
Then there's zina lisan, that's the zina of the tongue. It involves things like engaging in flirtatious speech or maybe overly soft speech with a non-mahram that might arouse desire.
Okay, the tongue.
And zina hati, the zina of the heart. This means harboring intentions or desires for zina, like fantasizing with pleasure. These might seem like small things, maybe, but within the Islamic framework, they're seen as pretty significant steps on a path toward that major sin.
That makes the scope much clearer. It's really quite comprehensive. So we've established this core definitions, broader implications. What's the foundational scriptural evidence? From the Quran and Hadith, what really underpins this strong prohibition?
Well, the prohibition of zina is very, very strongly emphasized in both the Quran and Hadith. It really underscores its gravity. And the consistent message isn't just don't do zina, but it's this strong injunction to avoid anything that might lead you down that path. For instance, Surah Al-Isra, verse 32, it says, "And do not approach zina. Indeed, it is an indecency and an evil way." That phrase, do not approach, it's key. It's an even stronger command, really, to avoid thoughts, actions, situations that could arouse desire. The Quran also, as we touched on, explicitly details severe punishments for offenders and warns about multiplied punishment on the Day of Judgment, unless, of course, one repents.
Wow, do not approach.
Yeah.
That's powerful. What about the Hadith, the Prophet's sayings?
Yes, the Hadith powerfully reinforce this. There's one Hadith that states, no fornicator is a believer at the time he commits the act of zina, which implies, a temporary departure from faith.
Wow.
Others warn against khalwat, that's the seclusion of a non-mahram man and woman, saying that Satan will be the third party present. There are also specific hadith, like one from Abu Huraira, that detail the zina of the eyes, the tongue, the heart, hands, feet. echoing what we just discussed about Zina Majazi.
Right, the different types.
Exactly. And the Prophet also warned that if zina and riba, that's usury, become widespread in a community, it actually invites divine punishment upon that community. So the overarching message from both the Quran and Hadith, it's crystal clear. Zina is seen as a profoundly destructive act, with consequences that go far beyond just the immediate physical transgression.
So the scope of zina is really far broader than just the physical act. It includes intentions, preparatory actions, like you said. This clear guidance from Scripture. How do scholars, both classical and contemporary, help us apply it to today's world? Especially, with this explosion of information and media we're constantly surrounded by.
That's a crucial question. Scholars across generations have consistently affirmed the prohibition of zina and, importantly, the actions leading to it. They recognized its destructive impact. Classical scholars, figures like Al-Tabari, Al-Qurubi, Ibn Katsir, they all interpreted approaching zina as basically entering a bad path, something leading to immorality, issues like unclear lineage, and even hellfire. They really stress those far-reaching negative consequences.
Okay, so the historical understanding was already quite broad.
Yes, but it's the contemporary scholars whose insights are particularly, I think, relevant for our digital age. People like Buya Hamka, in his commentary Tafsir al-Azhar, he meticulously detailed modern-day examples of approaching zina. He talked about things we see all the time, like halawat private seclusion, maybe wearing revealing clothes, consuming pornography, whether it's films, images, magazines, listening to suggestive songs, certain types of dancing, hugging, even things like women traveling far without a husband or a mahram, a male relative they can't marry. And he pointed to the consequences: unwanted pregnancies, illegal child sales, abortions, the spread of STDs.
So he directly connected traditional concepts to modern behaviors and technologies.
Precisely. And Professor Quraish Shihab, in Tafsir al-Misbah, he also emphasized that phrase, la takrabu, do not approach means avoiding anything that could stimulate lust. The idea is to prevent temptation altogether.
It sounds like they really extended that traditional understanding to account for all these new temptations we face. How does this apply specifically to how we interact with technology and modern media?
Exactly. Imam an-Nawawi, for example, he contextualized these concepts for the modern era. He acknowledged that technology and the sheer amount of information make it increasingly challenging to guard oneself, your body parts, from forbidden acts. He noted that zina mata, the zina of the eyes, can now easily happen through social media. Think Instagram, Facebook, where inappropriate photos and videos are just, everywhere.
Just a click away.
Right. And zina pendengaran, the zina of hearing, can happen just as easily, accessing forbidden audio. He also highlights that zina of the heart and mind is common when viewing content that sparks sinful thoughts. Because viewing things, mental imagery, those are often the primary entry points, aren't they?
That makes sense.
He even noted the easy availability of things like sex toys, which can blur boundaries by enabling sexual gratification without physical interaction, potentially normalizing aspects of zina majazi. It just shows how easily both zina majazi and the path towards zina hakiki can become normalized because of technology.
It's undeniable that media wields immense power in shaping how we see things, public perception. So how specifically do contemporary forms like drama, novels, songs, even comedy play a role in making something considered so serious like zina appear light or romantic or maybe even humorous?
Well, that's the core of the issue, isn't it? When zina or the behaviors leading up to it are repeatedly shown in a casual or romantic or humorous way, it gradually normalizes this grave sin in the public eye. Let's look at Indonesian drama, or sinetron as they're called there. They often depict extramarital affairs, cheating, premarital intimacy, often without really highlighting the moral or religious consequences. Things like holding hands, hugging, kissing, even implying or showing sexual intercourse are often presented as just normal parts of romantic relationships, especially for teenagers.
So it becomes part of the expected narrative for romance.
Kind of, yeah. For example, the research mentions a sinetron called Takdir Cinta Yang Kupili. It apparently discusses infidelity as a consequence of an arranged marriage. Now that subtly shifts the viewer's perception, doesn't it? From seeing it as a forbidden act to maybe seeing it as an understandable, if unfortunate, coping mechanism for marital problems.
Providing a justification almost.
Exactly, or framing it in a way that elicits sympathy. And other series, like Main Appy, even if it's a thriller, also put infidelity front and center, embedding it in popular stories. This constant exposure, it can lead to a kind of moral desensitization. When characters you like engage in forbidden relationships without facing significant negative repercussions, that line between right and wrong starts to blur. It subtly suggests that, well, maybe Zina is just a complex part of life, something that can be understood or even forgiven rather than a strictly forbidden act.
That's a really powerful point about how the narrative framing itself can shift perception. What about novels? They're often seen as more reflective, maybe deeper. Do they contribute to this too?
Oh, definitely. Novels play a significant role as well. Some popular works depict infidelity or extramarital sex in ways that challenge social and religious norms. Sometimes they even seem to glorify or justify it. The report mentions Ika Kurniawan's Kantikut Ituluka, for instance. It portrays characters having affairs, even taboo relationships like between a daughter-in-law and father-in-law, and apparently uses quite explicit language to describe sexual acts.
So quite direct portrayals.
Very direct. And then there's Ayu Utami's Saman. It features characters having relationships with married individuals, presents women as active and even aggressive sexual subjects, challenging societal taboos. Now, when these portrayals, especially if they're framed as freedom or rebellion, reach readers, particularly young people, they might start seeing Zina not as a sin, but as a form of, say, self-expression or pursuing happiness. It really blurs those moral lines and normalizes what's religiously condemned.
And what about music? Songs are often so pervasive they get stuck in your head. How do they subtly influence listeners on this topic?
Yeah, songs can be very subtle but powerful. They can normalize Zina through suggestive lyrics and melodies. The research included a semiotic analysis of a popular Indonesian song, Siti Badriah's Lagi Santik. It found elements of sexuality or Zina in both the lyrics and the music video. Semantically, the lyrics have lines where a woman feels beautiful, wants special treatment, even wants to be alone with you, which can certainly imply a desire for inappropriate intimacy.
Suggestive language.
Right. And syntactically, the analysis pointed to the music video featuring suggestive signs, minimal clothing, provocative interactions, dances that expose body curves. The overall impact is significant. Despite its huge popularity across all ages, even with children, many sources apparently described it as pornographic because of the lyrics inviting intimacy and the visuals. When you see children singing lyrics like that or imitating those dances, it really highlights a potential negative influence. They're exposed to content related to Zina without understanding the moral weight, effectively making behaviors that approach Zina seem beautiful or appealing.
Wow. It's quite unsettling to think how something seemingly just like a catchy pop song can carry such a heavy subtext. And finally, what about comedy? Humor often plays with taboos, pushes boundaries. How does it fit into this normalization picture?
Comedy is a really interesting case. Whether it's films, sitcoms, stand-up, it frequently uses themes of infidelity or illicit relationships for laughs. Think about movies like It's Complicated or The Dilemma. They often present infidelity quite lightly, making audiences laugh or feel amused rather than maybe disgusted or angry.
Yeah, I can picture that. The affair becomes a source of jokes.
Exactly. It's Complicated apparently portrays an affair with an ex-spouse, a kind of fun little romp. The Dilemma offers up a friend's wife's affair with crisp comedy.
And you see infidelity used as a joke in stand-up routines, YouTube content. It reflects a certain audience familiarity, doesn't it? Even slang terms like the Indonesian word boken for an unofficial partner finding their way into pop culture and comedy shows how these premarital, unauthorized relationships can become normalized.
So the humor itself lessens the severity. Precisely. While comedy aims to entertain, presenting illicit relationships lightly really diminishes their moral weight. Viewers might start seeing them as just funny mistakes or complex relationship dynamics, rather than serious religious and social violations. It potentially erodes awareness of how serious Zina is considered, making it feel, well, light or even funny, as the report puts it.
Okay, so we've really explored how various media forms, drama, novels, songs, comedy, present these behaviors, often romanticize them, sometimes humorizing them. What are the real concrete consequences for individuals, for society, when Zina is normalized in this way? What stands out to you as the most critical takeaway from the research on the impact?
I think the most critical takeaway really is the profound moral desensitization that occurs. It's a gradual process. When Zina is repeatedly presented in this light, romantic, or humorous way across all these different media society, and especially the younger generation who consumes so much media, gradually becomes less sensitive to the inherent wrongness of it from that Islamic perspective. Actions that, according to the religious teaching, should be considered vile and strictly forbidden start to appear ordinary or acceptable, maybe even attractive.
So it just chips away at the moral boundaries.
Exactly. It represents a really significant shift in moral perception, and it's driven largely by media. When media consistently portrays illicit relationships or infidelity as just part of entertaining stories, often without clear negative consequences or sometimes even with justification, it erodes traditional values and religious teachings. Think about the comedy example. Laughing at infidelity reduces the weight of the sin, diminishes that sense of shame that might normally be associated with it. And this desensitization, it's dangerous because it weakens the moral defenses, both for individuals and for society as a whole. When a major sin starts to feel light, well, the impetus to avoid it diminishes, doesn't it? And that increases the likelihood of deviant behavior and religious transgressions.
Okay, so that moral desensitization is key. Beyond that, what other repercussions does this normalization have, according to the report's findings? What are the tangible consequences?
Well, the normalization of Zina has really serious repercussions, and they align pretty closely with the warnings found in Islamic scripture. Firstly, and most fundamentally from that perspective, it's a grave sin that incurs Allah's wrath. Perpetrators face severe punishment both in this world and the afterlife if they don't repent. Remember that hadith. The fornicator is not considered a believer at the moment of committing zina. That really highlights how far it's seen as straying from the principles of faith.
That's a stark warning. What about the more earthly consequences?
Yes, there are profound individual and social consequences, too. The research suggests those who commit zina often feel restless, dissatisfied, maybe struggle to appreciate blessings in their life. Their honor can be damaged in the eyes of society, and they might be ostracized. And perhaps one of the most critical societal consequences mentioned is the damage to lineage, what's called nasab.
Lineage, how so?
Well, zina can ruin or obscure family lineage. Children born from illicit relationships might not have clear parentage, legally or socially. They might not be attributed to their biological father, which can affect inheritance rights and create social disadvantages throughout their lives.
Ah, I see. That's a major societal impact.
It is. And finally, the report points out that zina can be a trigger for other serious problems. It can lead to the spread of sexually transmitted diseases, obviously, but it can also trigger other grave sins, things like abortion or even infanticide resulting from shame or suicide due to that shame. It shows, from that perspective, how Satan can lead people towards destruction through this gateway of zina.
This deep dive has truly, I think, laid bare the significant role that contemporary media seems to play in normalizing zina. We see how romanticizing forbidden relationships, making light of infidelity using suggestive visuals, how all this gradually makes what Islam considers a grave sin seem, well, light, common, or even amusing sometimes. And this clearly clashes with fundamental Islamic teachings, which categorize zina as a fahisya, an indecency, and a sasabila, an evil way. The consequences, as you've outlined, are profound, both in this life and the hereafter. From those core definitions of zina hakiki and zina majazi to the explicit warnings in the Quran and Hadith, and those contextualized insights from scholars for our tech-driven world, the message seems very clear. This normalization can lead straight to moral desensitization, eroding our sense of shame, and contributing to issues like fractured families, unclear lineages, disease, and a loss of life's blessings.
Absolutely. And given these really serious implications, the research suggests that a collective, comprehensive effort is essential. It's not just one thing. It starts with comprehensive religious education, providing a deep, continuous understanding of the dangers of zina from that Islamic perspective, starting right in families and schools. We also really need to cultivate critical media literacy, empowering individuals, especially young people, to analyze the media content they consume, to identify these normalizing representations, and consciously filter what they take in.
So being smarter consumers of media.
Exactly. And families have such a crucial role here. They're really the first line of defense monitoring children's media consumption, yes, but also educating them about the dangers, instilling strong Islamic values from the start. Moreover, there's a responsibility on media content creators themselves, filmmakers, novelists, musicians, comedians. They bear a moral responsibility, arguably, to produce material that educates or at least doesn't normalize deviant behavior, adhering to ethics, societal norms, without trivializing grave sins.
That's a big ask in today's media landscape.
It is, but it's important. And finally, governments and religious institutions have a role too. strengthening regulations, perhaps, and oversight of media content that could harm public morals. And religious bodies need to be active in providing guidance on these contemporary moral issues, translating timeless principles for today.
So it really sounds like a multi-pronged approach is needed. Education, media literacy, family involvement, creator responsibility, and institutional guidance. It makes you think. The next time you encounter a seemingly harmless romantic subplot, or maybe a funny scene about cheating in your favorite show, it's worth considering the deeper societal implications it might carry, how it might be subtly shaping our collective moral compass. What filters are you putting in place for yourself and maybe for those around you? How can we actively engage with media in a way that respects deeply held values rather than perhaps inadvertently eroding them? It's definitely food for thought. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into understanding the normalization of Zina in contemporary media. We really hope this has provided you with some valuable insights.